I've been thinking about identity and intelligence, our form of it, our experiences of it, how we come to understand what it means to be a being, a human, an animal, or alive. And there are so many fascinating questions. And by these I don't mean conceptual gambits. I mean rather ways of pursuing something with the mind that radically changes what the mind may become and informs also what it may not become. And our conceptual, the underlying concepts that inform our languages and cultures are extremely impoverished. They are not like the things that they point at. In other words, they are not much like being. They are not much like human beings. They are not much like our experience or our nature. And they are not much like nature or reality. What they are instead is toolboxes. And these toolboxes arose in one kind of context, but by the time we inherited them, most of their contexts had been operationalized. That means they were converted to specific utilitarian purposes. This was not like their origins, and this is like our own lives. For we too were each born in our unique human person, some of which appear to be born damaged or incomplete, but in any case, we are born with an astonishing array of potentials that all of our ideas not only fail to deliver to our conceptual understanding, they hide them, and they co-opt these purposes and natures and potentials. And essentially, our lives and our minds are operationalized. In other words, they are reforged with far less ability for purposes that are extremely confused and have little to do with our humanity, our nature, reality, what it means to be alive. Or, and this is the most perhaps surprising part, intelligence. What real intelligence looks like. And so, especially in the morning, I'm filled with these questions, which are urgent imperatives for my curiosity and my intellect and my creativity. But not so much mine, even though I use this language, it's familiar, but ours. What are we missing together? And I think that most of our possible and real humanity lies not in individuals, which I think are a bit of a myth. I don't think they really exist. But in what happens when we come together, and in the purposes for which we come together. And we may notice that our cultures operationalize these purposes. They do the same thing that language did to its origins with our lives, our minds, and perhaps most importantly, the ideas, purposes, and dreams, the fears that bring us together, why we come together, why we make unities from what appear to be individuals. But there's something far more profound here about the nature of a self, and this is what I'm thinking a lot about. Because I think this self that we believe in and that we study into existence, that we practice into existence, that we demand and insist into existence as, quote, me, is a big construct, and it's a mess, and it's not true. And it's not true in ways that are really important and that orbit each of the concerns that I've discussed. The reality that our origins are filled with potentials, but as we grow and encounter society, culture, representational paradigms, languages, knowledge systems, like this, these potentials, rather than being nourished, sustained, further potentiated and articulated, are collapsed into utilitarian purposes. And we collapse with them into a self, but we never were really a self before. At least we were never an individual self. So what I'm trying to get at is that I think it is the nature of our minds, our souls, whatever those may be, and nature herself, to form unities that appear to have distributed bodies. That means that, like an animal with many animals that make it up. And what I'm trying to get at is this. We did not bring a mind into human birth. We did not bring the kind of intelligence that would become representational on its own as an individual into human birth. We acquired not so much our potentials, as was the promise, but the results of their dismissal in the products of language, modern human culture, and thought. Now, I'm going to ask an interesting question, and of course, although I'm saying I'm not really asking questions, I am asking questions. What I mean is I have to chase them in a way that keeps reframing my mind and the question rather than trying to verify some theory or establish one particularly. I want to travel rather than conclude, if that makes sense. But there's a really interesting question that relates with the topic, and a couple of questions really. The first one that I'm very much in love with is that when we are awake, we understand in a simple way the physicality of light. We know where the sources of light are and such. And we can understand that in the daytime it's light because there is the sun. Or there are our lights that we made that emulate the sun. There was no other source of light. Just to be really blunt, there was the sun. Prior to fire, no other form. There was lightning and things like that, or maybe a forest fire. But light came only from the sun until we made machines and such, tools that emitted light, which we became quite fascinated with. I'm holding one in my hand right now. But what I'm curious about is, what is the source of light, or its analog, in our experiences of dreaming? And I think this question is a lot more profound than it superficially appears. But here's the other question that I think is even more interesting. Why can we not remember the beginnings of dreams? Why are they lost to our conscious access? And is it in fact true that when we report a dream, we're not really reporting the dream because most of its beginnings are lost? We're reporting what would more properly be called its transformative conclusion into waking. We are reporting its endings. And isn't it fascinating that we can similarly not easily remember our early childhood? We don't tend, there are apparent exceptions, we do not tend to remember the originary states of our mind and our being. And I think part of the reason is that we acquired, those originary states were employed, were operationalized, to acquire the capacities of representational intelligence from culture, from others. In other words, we did not bring those capacities with us, except as potentials. And in their peculiar operationalization by human culture, most of those potentials were lost. And the relatively modest remnant was transformed in ways that, were we able to see the complete array of the possibilities, we would never choose the ways that resulted, nor would we like or recommend them. They are not like our intelligence or our nature, or nature herself. They are like the peculiar operationalizations of these by human collectives and their purposive agendas, which, let's face it, even in terms of human understanding, can be extremely deadly and bizarre, but compared to nature, are even more alien and fictional. Our animal pursues, our kind of animal invents bizarre representational overlays for reality, and then acts them out with terrifying consequence, pretty much for ourselves and every other life form on Earth, not to mention the history of life on Earth and whatever the possibilities of its future may now be. And a lot of these fictions involve two kinds of fictional individuals. Persons, fictionally isolated, conceptually by ideas, by the idea that each of us is a separate self, with a separate mind, separate heart, separate soul, separate life, separate birth, separate death, separate experiences. And the more obvious physical fact that not one of us emerged in isolation. Nor can we ever be isolated. I mean, we live in a tiny bubble, relatively tiny compared to space-time, surrounded by a thin membrane. It's one bubble. It's always been one bubble. To the same degree that we can say there are many organisms here, we can at least as equally say there's one organism here, a meta-organism, a superorganism that exists in billions of forms and bodies, endless myriads of them, moment to moment, as a unity first, and as distinguishable elements second. With precedence on the unity, we find that the self is in many ways a fiction of denotation. It's a conceptual and linguistic construct. And to whatever degree it may exist, in other words, to whatever degree we may be reasonably distinct and rationally, to make little rations, distinguishable, these are the result of unities that our ways of thinking, seeing, acting, and even learning are not blind to. We can see unities vaguely, but we don't understand that they have precedence. So in other words, I am an individual, I have an individual history, I understand that. But what's the nature of individuality? How much of me is separately located in me, is my possession? How much of my actions, thoughts, and experience are solely determined by me? We'd have to say none. I didn't acquire a mind from myself. And when I'm with another person, although I'm still me, Darren, quote unquote, it's more true for me that I get a new mind and become a we, such that the nature of what it means to be myself is radically transformed and expanded. I have a personal history. When Joe and I are together, whoever Joe may be, he has a personal history too. The sum of those produces a kind of binocular view that is impossible for me as an individual, and is more like the nature of our intellects, our being, our animal selves, and nature herself than our ideas. It seems to me that really in isolation what I have is one possible kind of mind, but what happens in true unity with any other being, not just a human being, is something astonishingly beyond that. And it seems to me that that inexplicable, almost unimaginable potential, pure, endless, infinite, profound, provocative, alive, is lost completely in our common habits and ways of thinking that place precedence on the fictional possessions of us in isolation. None of what we are is isolated in ourselves. I don't so much have a mind as whatever my mind may become is elicited by relation. Although I can relate with myself in isolation, what I'm really relating with is others in myself. All of the cultural, linguistic, intellectual, conceptual acquisitions, all from others, all from sort of the water of history and being and human being on earth, right? So are these mine? Am I a me? How separate is myself? And what would it be like if we didn't have such incredibly momentous fictions about the entitlement and the sort of invented importance of the aspects of the self that we operationalize to pursue this specific fable? This isn't to say that we should dismiss the dignity of individuals or their unique and precious local and time-bound being. Not at all. But rather, our esteem and wonder should be explosively expanded by recognizing that that's really the tiniest part of us, and most of what we practice in that very small part both impoverishes even this practice, even the practice of having a self, because it's very crudely articulated in ways that are dangerous and deceptive and compelling. So we're not even getting really what it means to be an individual in the cultural experiences that we're having as human beings, most of us. Or we are rarely encountering it and then feeling confused when we compare it to our normal existence. But we know almost nothing of what it means to be together, because the purposes that draw us together, the paradigms, the ideas, all come from this kind of bizarre, alienating model where Darren's mind is a local possession to him, and so too his being, his life, his history, his future. It has never been this way, it can never be that way, except in a model. And the model is so abstract and different from nature that any real encounter with that difference will stagger the entire structure of our minds and identities. And so, in a situation like that, we shall tend to avoid it. It is too provocative. It is too charged with the mysterious potential for change, which, from the idea of the stable local self, looks like death. Ordinarily, unless we are carefully invited into recovering the nature of our being and our relationship to nature and our intellects and our humanity in a context of true, purposive unity, unless we have this experience regularly, we're going to go further and further into its opposite, kind of. It's a conical spiral that goes down to a narrower and narrower possible expression or denotation of the individual. What I'm really dreaming about here, though, doesn't require articulate language. It's actually something very astonishing and amazing. It is a return to the potentials and the relational fluidity of the intelligences that are our birthrights in their originary forms prior to being repurposed, operationalized by language and culture. And I've had experiences, very deep experiences of this, that were so profound that I found no other experience that could even really compare muchly to them. And these are not merely epiphanies, I mean common experience of just being together in wonder and emergence, learning and mutuality with another being. And particularly human beings, but with any living thing. Life recognizes life. It also recognizes something like an alien. In other words, a creature with some kind of fictional representational paradigm that operationalizes the relationship, thus precluding its actual existence. I don't think we ourselves in the way that our languages and ideas, our religions, and our science tell us. It is my direct experience and my wonderful inspiration to know that most of what it means to be human, to be able to see and learn and grow, to have insight, is not like our ideas, but it is like nature. And it is like what happens outside the purposes and frameworks for which we too often come together. Even when we come together for, how shall we say, invented purposes, the aura of the potential is always present because we are together. And of my own mind, I simply know that in union with another, it is not mine. It is ours. I live and think and flow with another for us. And whether or the degree to which others share this kind of experience, I don't know. And yet, in observing children, prodigies, artists, or people in a context that has taken off the costumes of the culture and made a container in which we can truly and authentically explore what it means to be alive or intelligent or human, then we can see the promise and the nature of my question, which I hope we shall continue to pursue, not in isolation, but together.